Hi, this is your host Danny, and this is English Plus Podcast. Do you want to learn more about presentations? Do you know what makes a good presentation? Do you know what tools and visual aids you need for a presentation? What about the key steps of a presentation, the introduction, the main part, the closing part, and then the interaction with the audience? Do you know that? Maybe you do. Maybe you have given a lot of presentations. Maybe you haven't given any yet. Maybe you're preparing for your very first presentation. So it doesn't matter whether you are an experienced presenter or you are a newbie presenter, you will have a lot of benefit. You will learn a lot from this new Business English episode from English Plus Podcast. So if you're interested, if you want to learn more, there are a lot of tips and tricks. There are a lot of good things that you should keep in mind when you want to plan your next presentation. So join me in this episode and let's learn about presentation essentials in Business English from English Plus Podcast. Welcome to a new episode from English Plus Podcast, where you get to learn English, business, culture, literature, and a lot more. Two things to remember: that you will always find extra practice on our website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com, and don't forget to support us on Patreon to help us keep our content free forever. And now, this is your host, Danny, and let's enjoy a new episode from English Plus Podcast. Well, first, let's talk about the types of presentations that are out there. And of course, here we're talking about business presentations mainly. We're not talking about other kinds of presentations because obviously there are hundreds of presentations out there. It can be about anything. But if we just limit our scope to business presentations, we're going to talk about some of the most common presentation types we can encounter in a business environment. Now, we might have a press conference, a demonstration or a demo, a product launch, a workshop, or a seminar. What are these? Now let's start with the press conference. Now the press conference, for example, the chief executives of two companies tell journalists why their companies have merged, for example. That is a press conference. Or when your company has something important to say, maybe to defend a position, or maybe just to announce something important to the public. Remember, your company is doing business, that's right. But you have to tell people from time to time, you have to tell the public from time to time what you're doing, why you're doing it. Maybe you need to convince them of something. Maybe you need to tell them about something important that has an impact on society. And that is very important, especially if you work in a big company or especially if you have a big company. You need to hold press conferences whenever there is something important to say to people. But saying that, remember that you shouldn't hold press conferences just to tell the public anything, even if you have connections in the press. That doesn't mean that you should hold press conferences every now and then just to tell us about what you're doing. Remember, press conference is not a marketing tool as much as it is a communication tool with the society. But that aside, this is what a press conference is. What about the other type? A demo, a demonstration. Now, for example, the head of research and development gives a presentation to non-technical colleagues about a new machine that the research and development department has just completed. Now, a demo is you want to tell the people from your company, or maybe somebody from other companies, or from the public sometimes, especially if you want to encourage the public to use. We're talking about your customers here, or potential customers. So a demo, you show those people how this new technology works, or how this new idea works, whatever that is. It doesn't have to be technology all the time. What about a product launch? Like a car company announces a new model. Obviously, when you create something new, and you would want to tell people about it, because obviously you want those people to use this product, or obviously to buy it. And that is what we call a product launch. What about when company employees do practical exercises on time management, for example? What do we call this? Maybe it's not exactly a presentation, but because they take turns and show each other how to do things collaboratively, that is what we call a workshop. But remember, a workshop, we are talking about practical exercises, more than just one person standing in the middle of the room telling other people what to do. A seminar is a little bit different, like when a financial advisor gives advice to people about investments, for example. That is more like a one-person presentation, but usually in seminars, there is a lot of interaction, and there might be a lot of things to share, to think about, to do some exercises together. A lot of these things can happen in a seminar. And you might say, a seminar is not a presentation. You're right. A seminar is not exactly a presentation. It's just a type of presentation. But why am I saying that? Why am I saying the types of presentation, press conference, demonstration, product launch, workshop, seminar? Maybe you're presenting a report to the board of directors. That is also a presentation. Maybe you're presenting the report to your colleagues. Maybe you're presenting the report to other managers. There are a lot of types of presentations. I know that, but that's not exactly what I want to talk about. Why I mentioned the types of presentation is to get to the most important aspect of presentations that you have to keep in mind whenever you want to plan for a new presentation. Who are you talking to? Your audience. Because when you know what your presentation is, when you know what presentation you are going to prepare, the very first thing, and if you don't know, for sure, ask. Make sure to ask who is going to be there. Who am I going to talk to? Because the type of information you're going to choose is not dependent on your expertise only, or the knowledge that you have, or the information that you have. That is important, of course, because you are chosen to give this presentation because of the expertise you have, because you have something to say, right? If you don't have anything to say, you shouldn't give this presentation. You should give it to somebody else who knows more than you do. But that's not the point. The important point, the very first and the most important point, is that you have to know your audience, because based on the audience, you will shape your message better. You will know what things you should say to these people, what things you shouldn't mention. And here I'm not talking about lying to the audience, not at all. But the audience that you are talking to are interested in things and are not interested in other things. Some audience might be interested in more technical details, and some audience might not be that interested in technical details. You might go in depth and talk about some numbers and profits and whatever. And that is okay in some contexts based on the audience, because that's what they're interested in. But in some other contexts, you just want to talk about the performance without going into so much detail. But how can you tell? How can you tell when you want to talk about a product, when you want to talk about a project you're working on? And that happens to a lot of people. They're very good at what they're doing. They're working on a project. Maybe they're the project lead, and they know everything there is to know about the project. They are the experts. Maybe they created this thing. It's their own baby. They know everything about this project. They know how it started, how it is going now, the benefits, everything, the technical details, the numbers, the whatever. But that doesn't mean that you should mention everything you know about the project to everybody you talk to. You have to select the information that is relevant to the audience. That's why it is important to know what type of presentation you're giving, because when you know what type of presentation you're giving, you will know what audience you should expect in this presentation. And knowing the audience, you will need to prioritize what information to tell them first, what information is not relevant. And again, I'm not talking about hiding information. No, not at all. But some information is more important to say to this group of people. Know your audience, know who you're talking to, because remember, you don't have unlimited time to give your presentation. It's usually 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour. And even when it goes like you have unlimited time to give your presentation, please don't give a 2 or 3 hour presentation unless it is about some cutting edge thing. Unless you're Steve Jobs and you're announcing the launch of iPod, that doesn't work. People are not going to listen to what you're going to say for more than, say, 30 minutes. 1 hour max, depends on what you're talking about. But don't count on people listening to what you have to say, no matter how important that thing is. You have limited time, so choose what you want to talk about in this limited time that you have. And to help you with the decisions that you want to make is the idea of knowing your audience. And knowing your audience also helps you with the type of lingo, the language you want to use when you want to talk to these people. Should you go more technical, or should you use common language instead? Because remember, you wouldn't want to use language your audience wouldn't understand. You will lose them very quickly if you start using jargon and some terms they've never heard of, or they don't know what you're talking about. And trust me, nobody likes to be a fool, or nobody likes to feel like a fool, and nobody's going to admit it. They're not going to tell you we don't understand. They're not going to tell you we don't know what that means. But they're definitely going to lose interest in your presentation. And they know that they wouldn't want to be there when you give your next presentation. So be careful, learn your audience, know your audience, and build your presentation around your audience. That's a very important thing you should know. I know I talked a lot about this, but because this is the essential thing about any presentation that you want to give. And now we will talk about some more practical ideas that you can keep track of when you want to give a presentation, and that is what makes a good presentation. Let's talk about what makes a good presentation. Now, a presentation and the presenter, the person giving the presentation, are usually judged by a couple of things. They are usually about the way the presentation is organized, the way the presentation is delivered, and the way the presenter feels about the topic, the audience, and himself or herself. So let's start with the first category. We said the presenter is usually judged by the way the presentation is organized. What does that mean? The ideas, the visual aids, the pictures, charts, data designed to help people understand or remember particular information. Are they clearly structured? Are they easy to follow? If they are clearly structured, if they're easy to follow, that's very good. You score the first point. If not, maybe you should work on your visual aids. Maybe you should improve your visual aids or add them if there are none. And another point, how the information is mixed with interesting examples and stories. Remember that people want to hear how the presenter relates personally to the subject. Don't be so technical. Try to relate that to personal experiences. And of course, if you are the person concerned with this whole experience, mention that because it is very important. But again, it depends on the topic of the presentation. But the point here that you want to score is how the information is mixed with interesting examples and stories. Maybe these stories are about you or about somebody else, but there must be examples and stories. It shouldn't be just an abstract presentation. No matter how interesting it is, if it is abstract, it is not that interesting. So that is the first category. We talked about the organization of the presentation, how organized the presentation is. Now about the second category, the way the presentation is delivered. Now I will talk about 4 points here. The first point is the rapport with the audience. And what does that mean? That is the feeling the members have that the presenter understands them. If you can build this rapport with the audience, you're going to have a great presentation because the audience will know that you understand them, or they will have this feeling you're one of them. Maybe not one of them exactly. Maybe you are a manager and you're talking to employees and you're not in the same league. I know that. But you understand them. It doesn't have to be that you're one of them. It is important that you understand them. And don't think it's just about empathy. This is not the solution all the time. Sometimes it's overrated to be empathetic with the audience. That's not good. Because sometimes you may be empathetic, but you don't understand how they feel. You don't understand their situation, and that's not going to help you build rapport with the audience. The important thing is to make the audience feel that you understand them, to build this rapport with the audience. And then the second point is the eye contact, the way you look at the audience. Now, of course, talking about eye contact, we can talk for hours about eye contact and stuff like that. But the main thing to talk about eye contact is that you should keep an eye contact. You should maintain an eye contact with the audience, but not with one of the audience. Because the thing is that you might find a sympathetic person in the audience, a person who smiles at you and a person whose face tells you that he or she likes the presentation, and it's kind of inviting you to keep eye contact or to maintain eye contact with this person all the time. And that's a mistake because you're not giving the presentation to this person only. Now, I know we all like to look at the people who have welcoming features and they're smiling at us. Now, of course, it feels better when you have this feedback, this kind of feedback. Even a slight smile is a good feedback from the audience, and that's important, I know. But you have to remember that you are giving this presentation to everybody in the room, so you should maintain eye contact with everybody. Divide your attention, divide your eye contact to different parts of the room, to different areas of the room, and of course, different people. And don't maintain the eye contact for a very long time, because that will make the audience uncomfortable. That will make the person in the audience uncomfortable. And of course, remember, if you are a man and if you look at a woman for a long time, that's going to make her uncomfortable and vice versa. But this is not as important as not looking at the same person all the time, because that's going to make the others kind of upset. Why aren't you looking at us? Aren't you giving the presentation to us as well? You should maintain eye contact at all times with as many people from the audience as possible. You have to remember that. And of course, talking about eye contact, the basic thing is to maintain the eye contact. You can't look at the wall. You can't look at the ceiling. You can't look at your own feet. And even worse, you can't look at the screen when you want to talk to people. You have to look at them. And if you can't remember what's on the screen, that's your own problem. You should prepare before you come to this presentation. They expect you to prepare. You expect you to prepare. You can't just come to the presentation and start reading things from the screen. Now, I know that sometimes people read things from the screen because they're nervous, not because what the screen says and they forgot what they want to talk about. The screen is just a visual aid, not for you. It's for the audience. Don't look at it. If it is for you, so the presentation is a failure from the start. If you put the things you want to say on the screen, that's a big problem. You should rehearse your presentation. You should know the things. You're an expert, right? And that's why we picked you to give this presentation. If you can't talk about it, just pick someone else to talk about this. It's very important. And that is also related to eye contact. But in most cases, as I told you, people tend to look at the screen and talk to the audience that are sitting just behind them because they want to avoid eye contact. I know eye contact is not easy. I know you might not be used to it, but that's okay. You have to get used to it because eye contact is one of the most important things that people expect, that the audience expects from you in a presentation. And then let's talk about your voice. Well, when you want to give a presentation, you don't need to shout, of course, but you need to have a loud enough voice. And maybe you would want to check this, but maybe you want to check the venue. If you want to give a presentation in a very big conference room and you're going to stand at one end of the room and the audience may stretch all the way to the other end of the room, maybe you can rehearse before you come in the presentation, bring a couple of friends, tell them to sit as far as it gets from you and talk and ask them, is that loud enough? Because at the same time, you wouldn't want to be shouting. You would want to get to a good level, to a loud enough level, because you wouldn't want to be shouting at the people who are near you. And remember, all that depends on the venue. And that is, I know we're talking about the way the presentation is delivered, but that brings us that it's very important to know where you're going to give your presentation, to have a look at the place. You don't want to go into a place for the first time and you don't know exactly how to move around or how loud your voice should be. You should know about these things. And loud is not the only factor in your voice that you should care about. The variety in your tone of voice, that is very important. It is important not to speak in a monotone and to vary the speed that you speak at. Now that takes experience and that takes time to master, but you will get there. Maybe you are the best presenter in the world and you know all this and you are natural. You vary the tone of voice, and varying the tone of voice is not just about how loud and soft you go, that is one thing, and also how fast and slow you go, where you want to slow down, where you want to be a little bit fast. You can be strategic about that, and in time, this will become second nature. But if you are giving a presentation that is very important to you, that the company's future depends on, it's not a bad idea to even be strategic and you plan your tone of voice. You plan it, you rehearse it. Nothing's wrong with that. It's not always a good idea to be spontaneous. It's okay to be spontaneous, of course. It's good to be spontaneous. But if it is that important of a presentation, why not plan it? Plan your tone of voice. Rehearse it. Record it. Look at it. See if it is good or not. Ask other people that you trust to tell you if your tone of voice, the variety in your tone of voice is good. But the worst thing of all is the monotone. When you talk to people in the same way, variety in your tone voice, it's important not to speak in a monotone and to vary the speed that you speak at. Can you imagine somebody give you a presentation and speaks like that? I mean, you're going to fall asleep in the first 5 seconds. You don't want your audience to fall asleep, right? So let me just recap. The way the presentation is delivered is very important. The rapport you build with the audience, the eye contact, your voice should be loud enough, and there should be variety in your tone of voice. Now let's talk about the third category, the way the presenter feels about the topic, the audience, and himself or herself. Now, obviously, you should maintain a confident and relaxed look because I need to trust, I need to know that it is important for me to be here to hear about this thing from you. If you are not confident and if you're not relaxed, then I know that you're not the right person to listen to. I know that I should be listening to somebody else, or at least I shouldn't be paying attention. I'm here because I have to be here, and I have to listen to you. I don't have to. I can be here even if I have to, but I don't have to listen to you. That's the point. If you don't give me this confident and relaxed look, I'm not going to trust you. I'm not going to trust that what you're going to say is important, and that's why you're going to lose me as part of the audience. Maybe the rest will follow. It's very important to maintain this confident and relaxed look, and that's why it is important to rehearse a presentation. I'm not saying that we all have it. We all have this confidence and relaxed look. Some people have it because they have a lot of experience. But a lot of people have stage fright, even when they're talking to 3 people or 5 people. They also have the stage fright, and that's okay. That's why rehearsals are very important. Rehearse it. Rehearse it with some friendly faces first, with some people you know, some people you trust, your friends. And maybe then take it a step further. Rehearse it in front of some people you don't really know, but you can do it in front of them before the real presentation. That will help you gain more confidence, and on the day of the presentation, or when you need to give the presentation, you will feel or you will look confident and relaxed. And of course, you need to be enthusiastic about the topic. Now imagine now I'm talking about presentation, and I'm talking like, presentations are very important. Yeah, when you want to give presentations to people, you need to be confident, enthusiastic, positive attitude. You need to be interested. If you can't feel that I am enthusiastic about it, if I don't care about it, if I don't give a damn about presentation, why should you listen to me? If I don't get mad at times, if I don't get upset, if I don't sound enthusiastic and passionate about what I'm talking about, why would you want to listen to me? There is no reason. Because a lot of people can just pick a piece of paper and start reading. And they tell you about everything you need to know. Yeah, I can pick a book about presentations and start talking. And, just like presentation is blah, 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 blah. But I don't care about presentation. I'm not enthusiastic about it. I'm not passionate about it. And you're not going to listen to me. And that is exactly the same way when you give a presentation to people. If you are not enthusiastic enough about the topic you give, people are not going to want to listen to you. Remember that. And, of course, you have to be confident, relaxed look, enthusiastic, and you need to have a positive attitude. You can't be negative. Well, that is a given, of course. You need to have a positive attitude because positive is always better in presentations. You need to be interested in the audience and getting them involved. Now, getting them involved doesn't mean that they should participate. Maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't, based on what kind of presentation you give. But you need to be interested in them and getting them involved every single chance you have, even if you get them to think about things. Not directly. You are the sole speaker. Nobody is going to speak on the main stage except for you, but let them think, engage them, involve them in what you're talking about. Don't just give them information and information and information. You need to help them think. So, of course, with that being said, this will conclude what we need to talk about when it comes to what makes a good presentation, but that is not everything. Of course, when we want to talk about a good presentation, it can be a lot more than that, but I will just keep the ideas to a minimum like that. Already we stretched far enough and we talked a lot more than we usually talk in Business English episodes, and this is going to be a very long episode, I know. So we talked about what makes a good presentation. Let's talk next about presentation tools and visual aids.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Looking to enhance your English skills while exploring a world of knowledge? Then English Plus Podcast website is just for you. Dive into diverse topics ranging from science to literature, history to business, and myths to modern insights. Each episode from our podcast or article from our magazine is a journey of learning and discovery, designed to not only improve your language skills, but also broaden your understanding of the world. Join us at English Plus Podcast, where language meets limitless learning. Tune in today and take your English to the next level. Visit EnglishPlusPodcast.com to start your journey. English Plus Podcast, language, learning, enlightenment. Never stop learning with English Plus.
Now, when it comes to talk about presentation tools and visual aids, now, of course, you have different types of tools and visual aids. It might be a whiteboard. It might be a big screen that you have. Maybe there is a projector. Maybe you can connect your laptop to the big screen that you have and there's no need for a projector. It doesn't matter. These are technical things. Maybe there's a flip chart. Maybe you need a flip chart more than you need a screen. Who knows? It depends on your presentation again. Maybe the whiteboard is an essential thing you need. Maybe you don't need it at all. Again, it doesn't matter. You decide and I can't tell you which one is better. It depends on the presentation. If you want to show things on the screen and they're already on your computer, so great, bring your laptop, connect it to the screen. Whether there is a projector or not doesn't matter again, because that is also a technical thing. But you need to try these things before the presentation starts. That's my point. If there are going to be handouts, if there's going to be a flip chart, a whiteboard, a screen, slides on your laptop, you're using PowerPoint, you're using Keynote, you're using whatever software or app you want, test it out before the presentation a couple of times. And preferably in the venue where you're going to give your presentation, because you want no surprises at all. When you test it in the same place, maybe a conference room, maybe a hall, a big hall, who knows? It depends on your presentation again. But test these things out before the presentation, because you want to make sure first that everything is working. You want to make sure that everything is working from the perspective of the audience. It's not enough that you can see everything, because remember, all these things, all these presentation tools and visual aids are for the audience, not for you. You are helping the audience understand better what you want to talk about. So you want to see if it works from their perspective, not from your perspective. So it might be also a good idea to bring a friend along and you tell this friend to be in the place of the audience and to tell you whether they can see well, whether, if there is something that they need to listen to, they can hear it, they can't hear it, they can see it well on the screen, it's a little bit small, maybe you can make it a little bit bigger. Maybe this PowerPoint slide is a little bit too crowded. There are a lot of things on it. They're just competing for your attention, and that's when you lose your attention. Maybe you can get this information, because remember, a second eye is always better. When we do something, it might be perfect, but it might be perfect from our own perspective because we did it. And we see it as perfect, but when another eye looks at it, they can see the imperfections. And it is very important to ask people. Don't be too sure of yourself or too full of yourself. Ask other people for their opinion, because believe it or not, sometimes a very slight change to your PowerPoint presentation or to some of the things you're going to do in this conference room on the day of the presentation is going to make a lot of difference. So with that being said, I will have to say that I talked about most of the things that I wanted to talk about in this episode, but let's go quickly over a couple of more ideas. Let's talk about the key steps of the presentation, and let's talk about the audience interaction. And finally, we will wrap up with some advice that you need to keep in mind, and that has to do with some intercultural aspects that you need to be aware of when you give a presentation. So now let's talk about the key steps in a presentation. All right, when you want to think about the key steps of a presentation, well, actually, there are 3 steps to think about. There is the introduction, the main part, and the closing. Mainly, in a nutshell, in the introduction, you're going to tell them what you're going to tell them. You're going to tell them about it. What is the presentation about? And then in the main part, you tell them, and then in the closing part, you remind them what you told them. So it's like, tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you have just told them. That is the 3 main steps of the presentation. You need to have an introduction, a main part, and a closing. You can't just start with your presentation, no matter how big and important it is. You need to introduce yourself. And again, that depends on the audience. Maybe you know everybody in the room and you want to jump right to, there are 3 main areas we want to talk about or we want to look at today. I'm going to talk about this. If you have any questions, I'll be very happy to answer them at the end of the session. That is very important, by the way, to mention at the beginning of the presentation if you don't want people to interrupt you. You tell them politely at the beginning of the presentation that if you have any questions, I'll be very happy to answer them at the end of the session. So that means, please don't interrupt me. You're asking them politely not to interrupt you. But again, coming back, now if the people in the room know you, you don't have to go for my name is, but if they don't know you, you should introduce yourself definitely and very briefly. Remember, you have to catch their attention in this introduction. After introducing yourself very quickly, if you want to talk about who you are, because that is an important thing to tell your audience because they need to know you are an expert, okay, no problem. Tell them who you are, tell them why you are an expert, but don't go into a lot of detail. Make it quick, make it very short, and it's not about they should be interested in you. They should be interested in what you are going to talk about. That's what you want to grab their attention to. You want to grab their attention to what you want to talk about, not to who you are. I mean, you might be a very interesting person and that's very good for you, but that's going to show in the presentation anyway. They're going to love the presentation because you are enthusiastic, passionate, and special. Fine. But they should be interested in what you have to say, not in your personality, right? Anyway, make the introduction short. If the people in the room don't know you, tell them who you are, but more importantly, talk about the key points you're going to talk about and let them know why this presentation is important for them, what this presentation is going to give them. What are they going to learn from this presentation? Because at the very first beginning, when I read something, when I look at something, when I watch a video, I could easily skip the video after 1 minute max if I don't know what the heck I'm going to stay 20 minutes listening for or watching, and if I am not really sure that this is really something interesting for me. So you need to tell the audience what they're going to learn, why this is going to be important for them. And then the main part, you can start with, okay, to begin with, let's talk about this, let's look at this, whatever. You can use expressions like, that's all I have time for on technical skills. Let's move on the second area, interpersonal skills, as you can see on this slide, etc., etc. And you can say, for example, you can go for things like, I think that covers everything on this thing. Time is moving on, so let's turn to the third area. Something like that. These are expressions. Of course, they're not important to use, just these expressions. You can use any expressions you want, but these are just some ideas. And finally, when you want to get to the closing part, you can go like, that's all I have to say on or about this area or about this topic. And then you move to the closing, because in the closing, it's very important to sum up. Now you say, firstly, we talked about this. Secondly, we talked about that. And last but not least, we talked about this and this and that. So you need to remind people what you talked about, because remember, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you have told them. It's very important, these 3 steps that you have in a presentation. But remember, don't spend a lot on the introduction. Your introduction should be short and sweet and interesting. Attention grabbing. That's very important. The real juice, of course, is in the main part. That's why we're here. We want to learn about this. But first, grab my attention in the introduction, and then the real meat is in the main part. And of course, in the closing part, you're going to remind me of the good stuff that I've learned from you in this presentation. And that brings us to another point that is very important, and that is audience interaction. Let's talk about that next. So when we want to talk about audience interaction, let's talk about closing and dealing with questions. Now, of course, you can close and deal with questions by saying something like, that brings me to the end of my presentation. Are there any questions? Do you have any questions? Would you like to ask me any questions, etc.? Now, when you want to respond to people and their questions, you have to be polite at all times. Even if you want to disagree, and you have to disagree, you can't be nice. You have to tell them what you really think. Because, it might be a question that they really want a straight answer. They don't want just a diplomatic answer to. But be polite at all times. Don't make fun of them. Don't make fun of their questions, even if the question is stupid. Just answer as politely as it gets. And hopefully, their questions are going to open a new perspective in your presentation that's going to make it only richer. But how can we answer some of the questions? Well, you can go like, that's a fair point. When somebody talks about something you haven't mentioned in your presentation, and they're talking about a point that is reasonable and that is worth considering, you might go like, that's a fair point. If they ask about things you can't talk about because they're confidential, you can go like, that's confidential. I'm afraid I can't tell you. Maybe like that. No problem. Just tell them that's confidential. I'm afraid I can't tell you. Why not? Or if they ask you about something you don't really know because it's not your field, tell them. Tell them that's not really my field, but I can put you in touch with someone in my organization who is working on internet applications. Maybe they want to ask you about internet applications and you're not the person to ask. Tell them that's not really my field. No problem. You don't have to answer all the questions. You need to be genuine about it. And of course, you have to know that you don't have to answer all the questions, but please don't answer questions you don't know the answers to. Don't. If you don't know the answer, just tell them. Even if you're supposed to know the answer and you don't know it for some reason. Maybe because you're lazy, maybe because you haven't done your homework before the presentation, fine. Don't give them answers you're going to regret later because they're wrong. If you don't know, you can tell them that's not really my field, and you can tell them I need to check that and get back to you, fine. But don't give them wrong answers. It's very important, especially if they're strangers, right? Especially if you're talking to some VIP audience, whoever they may be, I don't care. It's not about how important they are. The people who are attending your presentation are always important no matter who they are. Don't give them wrong answers. You can say that's not really my field, or if you're not sure, you can tell them I need to double check this and I will get back to you after the presentation. Maybe tomorrow, you can tell them tomorrow, next week, it doesn't matter. But just tell them that I can't give you an answer now. I need to double check and I will get back to you. I will get back to you, and when you promise something like that, please keep your promise. Because you don't want just to be this person who says, yeah, I will do this, I will do that, and then they never hear from you. You want them to trust you, right? Especially in the long run. But saying that, it's not always that you don't have the answer to the question. Sometimes people ask questions that are beyond the scope of the presentation. And you can be the judge of that, if you want to answer this question or not. But if it is too much beyond the scope of the presentation, and that is taking from the time of the presentation, you should tell them that you're not going to talk about this because it is beyond the scope of today's presentation. You can say, well, I think that goes beyond the scope of today's presentation, so maybe we can talk about it at some other presentation, or maybe after we finish the presentation. But you don't want to lose the focus you have in your presentation. You're focusing on one topic. Stay on this topic. Don't digress, and don't let yourself be digressed by the questions of your audience. You can tell them, I think that goes beyond the scope of today's presentation. And of course, sometimes they ask you too many questions and you can just go like, I'm afraid we've run out of time. It happens. It happens. They keep asking questions, and that's a good sign. If they ask questions, that means they're interested and they were paying attention, right? That's why they're asking too many questions. Usually, most of the cases, that means they're interested. That's a very good thing. But sometimes you run out of time, so you can tell them, I'm afraid we've run out of time. Of course, you can offer to meet them after the presentation or to talk to them casually after the presentation, or maybe, just to schedule some other time. It depends on what you want to say. And now we finally come to the last point of this very long episode, and thank you very much for sticking around with me until this very point. We will talk about some intercultural aspects that you need to keep in mind when you give presentations. These are going to be very important points, so you need to listen to these things. And let's talk about those intercultural aspects next.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Unlock the marvels of mycology and take a journey of deep discovery into the divine. LordofSpore.com has 21 unique varieties of magic mushroom spores that will open doors you never knew existed. From the shamanic rituals of 10,000-year-old tribes, to Plato, Socrates, the Dionysian mysteries, and even early Christianity, entheogens have been the key to unlocking the secrets of the infinite realm that we are all part of, offering us mere mortals a glimpse into the sacred meaning of everything we see, and everything we don't. Join us on our journey. It starts with a few microscopic mushroom spores, and it grows into a network across time and space, connecting us all to infinity and beyond.
So these points are short, but very important, and very important for you to remember. It's very important to remember these things. First of all, avoid mannerisms. What does that mean? Irritating ways of moving and speaking. If you have that, control yourself. Rehearse before the presentation, because you don't want to go on for a long time like, etc. If it is the case, if it is your mannerism, try to defeat it. Try to get over it. Try to practice not using it. And it's not only about the irritating ways of speaking. also irritating ways of moving. If you have something like that, just try to control yourself. Remind yourself you need to rehearse. Because if it is irritating, it's going to irritate them. No matter how important what you're talking about, they're going to be focusing on these irritating ways of moving and speaking. That's point number one. Point number two, be careful with humor. For example, don't make jokes about people in the audience. Never. Unless it is relevant, unless you are a stand-up comedian. But if you're not a stand-up comedian, you wouldn't want to make any jokes about anybody in the audience. Remember, we're talking about business presentations, right? So you need to be careful. And it's not wrong to use humor, of course, but don't use it too much. Don't overuse it because you're not a stand-up comedian. You're there for a reason. You're an expert. You can be a little bit funny, but be very strategic about that. And the third point, dress formally unless you know for sure that the occasion is informal. You wouldn't want to go to a presentation while you are the key speaker and you step inside the room, everybody is dressing formally and you're the only one with jeans and t-shirt. I mean, that is very bad for presentations because if you don't respect them from the beginning, especially if everybody is dressing formally and you're not, again, unless you're Steve Jobs in the room, people are not going to listen to you. People are not going to respect you that much. Even if you have your own ideas about dressing formally, but if everybody is dressing formally, there's nothing wrong about dressing formally. Again, unless you really know for sure that the occasion is informal. And the fourth point, maintain eye contact by looking around the room at each person in the audience for about a second before moving on to the next person. Don't concentrate on just one or two people. That's what we talked about before. The eye contact is very important. Try not to focus on one person or two people because they have those smiling faces and you like looking at them because they are telling you that your presentation is great. Don't look at these people and forget about the other people who are there. Everybody is as important, so you need to look at everybody. And don't just go around the room like crazy. At least maintain the eye contact for a second or two before you move to the next person, okay? Don't just go look around everybody and it seems like you're a crazy person who has something wrong going on in his mind or her mind. Don't do that. Maintain the eye contact by looking around the room at each person in the audience for about a second or two before moving on to the next person. The next point, face the audience at all times. Don't speak to the equipment or the screen. Don't look at your computer. I know you love your computer. I mean, you spent a lot of time preparing this presentation on your computer. Maybe you were talking to the screen all that time while you were rehearsing, but you need to forget about the equipment. And again, remember, everything you have prepared on the screen, on your computer, the handouts, whatever, these things are for the audience, not for you. You can't look at them and turn your back to the audience. That is a killer. That is a presentation killer. Face the audience at all times. And now the next point, remain standing. Don't sit. Stay more or less in one place and don't move around too much. I mean, if you have a problem and you can't stand for a long time, well, how long is the presentation going to be? Is it going to be for 3 hours? If it is a 20 or 30-minute presentation and you are speaking, especially when you are speaking, of course, if you are just waiting for the audience to do something and you sit down, maybe it's okay. But if you are talking, don't sit down. Don't ever sit down. Stay on your feet at all times. No excuses. And try not to move around the room too much because that's going to confuse them. Unless it is necessary, and I can't see why it should be necessary. Maybe in some presentations it is important, but in general, like 99.9% of the presentations I know about, you should be in one place. Move, of course, move your body. Don't just stand stiff, no, but don't move around the room too much. And now the next point, it's about smiling. Smiling is fine, of course, and it's very important at appropriate moments, but not too much. If you smile a lot, it can seem insincere, as if you don't really mean it, and you don't want that, right? Smile when you really have something to smile about. It's that simple. You don't just go on smile all the time because you're a positive person or you're a cool person or No, you're not a nice person there. You are an expert. You're telling them about something they need to know. You can be serious at times. You can be serious maybe most of the time, fine. You can smile again because smiling is important. You should also show that you're kind of a nice person, but don't just keep on smiling all the time because that will tell them that you are insincere. And now for the next point, use gesture. That means hand movements. Use gesture, your hand movements to emphasize key points. Point with your whole hand rather than just one finger. Don't use a finger. I know. I'm not even talking about any specific finger in your hand, but don't use any, because fingers have different meanings in different cultures, and usually when you use one finger, it's kind of like being superior, just like you're pointing a finger at something or at someone or whatever. Try, when you use gestures, practice that you use your gestures with your full hand. Point with your whole hand, not with fingers. And I know that some people, of course, we can't point with this finger or with that finger. Of course, I'm not talking about that finger, for God's sake. I'm talking about any other finger. Don't use any other finger. Use your whole hand. That's a lot safer, and it works in a lot of cultures. Because in some cultures, you might be using a gesture that is okay in your culture, but it is not in theirs. But usually using your whole hand is safe in all cultures. And finally, respect the audience. That's very important. Don't make exaggerated claims. Don't say things are better than they really are. Respect the audience. They're not stupid, and you're not there to fool them unless you are there to fool them. That's your business. But if you are really there to inform them, to educate them, to tell them about something new, whatever the reason, whatever the purpose of your presentation is, respect the audience. Don't make exaggerated claims. Don't say things are better than they really are. And with that, we come to the end of our episode today. It's a very long episode, and thank you very much for sticking around with me until this very point. I hope the information I shared with you about presentation helps. Now, remember, these are all ideas. You are the judge. You know what's good and what's not based on your situation, based on your personality. And please, just coming to the end of this episode, I'm not telling you to be somebody you are not. Be yourself. These are just points you need to consider. You need to keep in mind. Consider me like a friend, and you're rehearsing your presentation in front of me, and I'm telling you about a couple of things I think you should work on. But that doesn't mean that you should be a person you are not. Be yourself. That's the most important thing, because that's the easiest thing to do. Be yourself. You know how to act. You should act natural, right? But at the same time, remember these points we talked about. Remember to respect the audience. Remember to know the audience very well, because you are doing that for them, not for you. Okay? Now, that being said, let me tell you that you can go to our website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com, and you can find a lot of information about this episode and about other episodes. We have interactive activities. We have PDF downloadable worksheets. We have a lot of good stuff for you on our website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com. Take the link. It's in the description. Go there. You will find a lot of good stuff you can use. And don't forget to support us on Patreon, because we're doing that for you, but we need your support. We need your support to continue. We don't have any ads. We don't have any premium features, and we would love to keep it this way. I don't want to add ads or premium features to the podcast unless I really have to. So we can get there together if you support us on Patreon. The link is also in the description. Become a supporter of English Plus on Patreon and help us achieve our goals together with your help, with your support. Now, that being said, this is your host, Danny. I would like to thank you very much for listening to another episode from English Plus Podcast. I will see you next time.